Hello, friends! Arthur, King of Britain, a legendary medieval warrior and the focus of the famous King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table story. Arthur is one of the most iconic figures in world literature. But did he really exist? Let's find out. Arthur may have been a historical figure, but his life and deeds were greatly exaggerated by writers over the centuries. This is where we get the story of how Arthur pulled the sword from the stone as proof of his right to be king. Well, that's a difficult question to answer because there are so many myths and legends surrounding him. What we do know is that he was probably born in the 5th or 6th century. This is based on the fact that he is said to have died in the year 537, and people don't tend to live much beyond 80 years old. In some versions of the story, the sword is pulled from an anvil instead of a stone. Either way, it's meant to show that Arthur is the true king of Britain, even though he's just a peasant. Again, this story comes from medieval literature, and there's no evidence that it's true. It may have been inspired by a real event, but if so, it was almost certainly very different from the version we know today. He was probably born in what is now Wales, and his father was probably a local chief. The character of Merlin first appears in French literature in the 12th century. Due to the mists of time, we may never know what really happened, but one thing is certain. The stories of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table will continue to fascinate us for centuries to come. He's usually depicted as a wizard, but in some versions, he's a kind of magician who uses his powers for good. Regardless, there's no evidence that a real Merlin existed. If there was a person who inspired the character, we don't know who that was. But even here, the connection between this Arthur and the historical figure is tenuous at best. He is said to have led his troops to victory against the Saxons, and this is likely where the stories of his bravery and skill in battle come from. But as the centuries passed, these stories grew and changed, and eventually, Arthur became the leader of a secret society of warriors, known as the Knights of the Round Table. In other words, the real Arthur may have been very different from the legendary one we know today. The earliest references to Arthur date back to the 9th century. He is mentioned in a book called the Welsh Trilogy, which describes him as a war leader who fought against the Saxons. However, this Arthur is not much like the Arthur of legend. They were loyal to Arthur and followed him into battle. Some of the most famous knights include Sir Lancelot, Sir Gawain, and Sir Percival. But again, these characters are largely the product of medieval romance novels. There is little evidence that they ever really existed. He has no connection with the Knights of the Round Table or the magical sword Excalibur. The first real mention of these things comes from a French romance novel called Le Roman de Brut, written in the 12th century. So who was the real Arthur? As a young man, Arthur joined the British Army and rose to the rank of commander. According to legend, the Knights of the Round Table were the most powerful fighters in the kingdom. One of the most enduring legends about Arthur is the story of how he pulled the sword Excalibur from a stone. What about Merlin? Was there a wizard who helped Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table? Probably not. In conclusion, the real King Arthur was almost certainly very different from the legendary figure we know today. He probably wasn't even called Arthur. Thank you for watching. See you next time!